I'm starting by prepping my vegetables and cutting into bite-sized rustic pieces. Today I'm using some onions, celery, carrots, and parsnips. I'm serving this Guinness stew over mashed potatoes, but you could also add in some red potatoes or even some turnips. And just a reminder that you will be able to find this recipe, the list of ingredients, and much more in the Show More section below. Next is the beef. I'm using a chuck roast that I cut into about 1-inch pieces. I like using a beef chuck roast because it has lots of marbling of fat and lots of flavor. You can use a cheaper cut of beef, as this stew will be cooking for over an hour and the meat will tenderize nicely. I'm coating the beef with a little flour, seasoned with some salt and black pepper. I'm just lightly coating and shaking off any excess flour. In a pan on medium-high heat, I'm adding in enough oil to coat the bottom of the pan. Now I'm adding in my beef and cooking for about 1 to 2 minutes on each side until they are golden brown. This is going to produce a lot of flavor. The beef is not cooked all the way through, but I'm removing from the pan and setting to the side until I get my vegetables started. In goes some diced onions, stirring and cooking for a minute. I'm adding a little minced garlic, not much. I'm also adding some tomato paste, and this will add some flavor and help thicken the stew. Giving a good stir and cooking for 1 minute to get everything mixed, and then I'm adding in my carrots and celery. Again, another good toss. And now the good part, adding the Guinness beer. This is the Guinness I will be using. I don't drink this beer, but I found some at Wegmans. It is a rich Guinness Stout and will give this stew a wonderful rich depth of flavor. In goes the entire bottle. I'm also adding in some beef broth. Bringing this up to a simmer, stirring and making sure I scrape all those good tidbits off the bottom. I'm adding in some Worcestershire sauce, and these are the tops to my celery, and I thought I would just toss them in for some more flavor. I have about 6 to 8 fresh sprigs of thyme and some fresh chopped parsley. You could also add some rosemary if you like. Giving that a good stir and adding the beef back into the pan. I gave it a taste test and I'm adding in a little salt and black pepper. Bringing this up to a simmer, turning down my heat, covering, and cooking for an hour, occasionally stirring. After 1 hour, I'm adding my parsnips. This would also be the time if you were adding any potatoes or turnips. The beef is not quite tender yet. I'm gently stirring, covering, and cooking for another 20 to 30 minutes, or until the meat and vegetables are tender. This stew is smelling amazing. It's been 25 minutes and the stew is done. Tonight I'm serving with some mashed potatoes. This Guinness stew is so good and rich. The Guinness Stout beer really adds a tremendous amount of flavor. This is comfort food at its best. Garnishing with a little parsley. The beef is nice and tender and I just love all the vegetables. The broth is just the right consistency for us, but if you like, you can thin it out with a little more broth. This Irish beef and Guinness stew recipe is just in time for St. Patrick's Day. Give it a try. There are not many ingredients, but this is such a delicious and comforting classic meal. Corned beef is a salt-cured beef brisket, so you want to cook this low and slow. Today I'm using my crock pot. I have 1 medium diced onion and 3 diced carrots that I'm adding to the bottom of this crock pot. This is going to make a nice bed for the corned beef to set on. I'm putting in the carrots now because they're going to take the longest to cook. This is a 3-pound piece of corned beef that I rinsed well. I'm placing in with the fat cap side up and sprinkling the top with the seasonings that came with the meat. As the corned beef cooks, the fat will render and cook down through the meat, keeping it juicy and flavorful. I'm adding in 4 cups of beef broth. You could also use water, beer, or chicken broth. And that's it for now. covering and cooking on the low setting for 4 hours, and then I'll bring you back for the next step. It's been 4 hours and the house is really starting to smell good. Now I'm adding in the potatoes and cabbage. I have 4 medium peeled and quartered yellow potatoes. I'm keeping the potatoes and cabbage larger pieces because this is going to cook for another 4 to 5 hours. If you are cutting the potatoes and cabbage into smaller pieces, then you may want to wait and add them 2 to 3 hours before it's done. Just poking the potatoes down into the broth and placing the cabbage wedges on top. This is about half of the cabbage head. Placing the crock pot lid back on and cooking an additional 4 hours on low or until the cabbage and potatoes are tender. It took 5 more hours for everything to be fully cooked. When adding the potatoes and cabbage, it took the crock pot time to come back up to heat and start cooking again. This is not a slow cooker meal that you want to cook on the high setting. You want to cook the corned beef low and slow, so you have to be patient. I took the fat cap off of the meat and sliced against the grain. The corned beef is juicy and tender. All the vegetables go so well together, and they are a meal in themselves. Don't forget to drizzle over some of that wonderful broth. A piece of Irish soda bread goes great with this corned beef meal. If you are looking for a St. Patrick's Day meal, this classic corned beef and cabbage slow cooker meal recipe is so easy and delicious. Enjoy! If you like this video recipe, please hit the like and subscribe button. Remember to hit the bell next to the subscribe to make sure that you get my future video recipes. You can also find me on Facebook and at my website. Feel free to share this recipe and my channel with your friends and family. And until next time, much love!